You know that feeling when you understand every word someone says in English, but when it's your turn to speak, nothing comes out.
It's one of the most common frustrations I see with language learners. They can read, they can listen, they can even think in English, but speaking, that's where everything freezes.
So what's actually happening there? Is it just a lack of practice, or is something deeper going on?
It's fascinating, actually. The barrier isn't usually linguistic at all. It's psychological. Your brain is literally trying to protect you from something it perceives as dangerous.
That sounds almost biological, like we're wired to stay silent?
In a way, yes. And today we're going to explore not just why this happens, but what actually breaks that silence. We'll look at the neuroscience behind language learning, why perfectionism might be your biggest enemy, and a principle that applies far beyond just learning English.
I have a feeling this conversation is going to challenge some assumptions about what it really means to learn something new. Let's dive in. You know what struck me most about Leo in that transcript? It wasn't that he couldn't speak English, it was that he was terrified to try. There's this moment where he says he's scared of saying something wrong, scared of bad pronunciation. And I thought, that's not a language problem, that's something deeper.
It's fear, pure biological fear. And here's what most people don't understand. That fear isn't a character flaw. It's your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do, protect you from social rejection. When Leo hesitates before speaking, his amygdala is lighting up like he's about to step in front of a predator.
Wait, so the same part of the brain that keeps us from getting eaten is the part that stops us from speaking a new language?
Essentially, yes. There's this concept in language acquisition research called the affective filter, Stephen Krashen's work. Think of it like a mental gate. When you're anxious, when your self-confidence is low, when you're motivated by fear rather than curiosity, that gate slams shut. The language input is still coming in through your ears, but it can't reach the part of your brain that actually processes and acquires language. It's blocked.
So Leo could be listening to perfect English all day long, but if he's terrified, none of it sticks?
Not quite none of it, but significantly less. The filter doesn't disappear completely, but it thickens. And here's the thing that breaks my heart. The research shows that 90% of language students lack self-confidence. 90%. And 83% worry specifically about making mistakes. This isn't Leo's personal problem. This is the default state of language learning.
That's almost everyone. So we've built this entire system of language education, and the primary experience for most students is fear?
Yes, and it gets worse. Because when you're afraid of making mistakes, you develop this hypervigilance. You start monitoring every word before it leaves your mouth. You're running this internal quality control system that's so strict, nothing passes through. Leo says he's scared of saying something wrong. But what does that even mean? Wrong to whom? By what standard?
I'm thinking about how this plays out in real time. Leo wants to speak, but before the words can come out, there's this committee in his head that has to approve everything first.
And that committee is brutal. It's asking, is this grammatically perfect? Is my pronunciation native-like? Will people judge me? Will I sound stupid? And while that committee is deliberating, the conversation has moved on. The moment is gone. So Leo stays silent, which reinforces the belief that he can't speak, which makes the fear stronger next time.
It's a trap, but here's what I don't understand. If silence is the result of fear, why do some teachers treat silence like it's just laziness or lack of effort?
Because they don't understand the silent period. This is crucial. In language acquisition, there's a well-documented phase where learners are taking in language but not producing it. They're listening, processing, building internal models of how the language works. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. But inside, there's this incredible cognitive construction happening.
So silence isn't always failure?
Not at all. Think about how children learn their first language. They spend months, sometimes over a year, just listening before they produce their first words. And we don't panic about that. We don't say the baby is failing to learn language. We understand they're absorbing. But with adult learners, we expect immediate production. And when we don't get it, we assume something's wrong.
But Leo's silence feels different from a baby's silence. The baby isn't afraid. Leo is.
That's the distinction. There's productive silence, the kind where you're actively processing, where your brain is doing the work of acquisition. And then there's paralyzed silence, where fear has shut down the system entirely. Leo's silence is the second kind. He's not in a natural silent period. He's in a fear-induced free state.
How do you break that? Because Lisa's advice in the transcript is interesting. She tells him not to think too much before speaking. But that seems almost too simple.
It sounds simple, but it's actually profound. What Lisa is doing is giving Leo permission to bypass that internal committee. She's saying the mistakes you're afraid of, they don't matter as much as you think. Small mistakes are not a problem. And that's not just reassurance. That's a direct attack on the affective filter.
Because if mistakes don't matter, then the fear loses its power.
Precisely. The fear is based on the false premise that making a mistake in language is dangerous. But it's not. No one dies from saying, I go to school yesterday instead of I went to school yesterday. The social consequences we imagine are vastly overblown. And when someone like Lisa explicitly tells you that mistakes are okay, it's like she's reaching through the screen and lowering that filter manually.
But why is thinking the enemy? I mean, isn't careful thought a good thing?
In most contexts, yes. But in language production, especially for someone like Leo who's already paralyzed by fear, thinking becomes overthinking. It becomes analysis paralysis. The goal of fluent speech is automaticity. You want the language to flow without conscious monitoring. When you're thinking too much, you're engaging your explicit learning system, your conscious rule application system. But fluent speech comes from your implicit system, the part that just knows.
Like how you don't think about the grammar of your native language, you just speak it.
Right. And you can't get to that automatic state by thinking harder. You get there by speaking more, by giving yourself permission to be imperfect, by lowering the stakes. Lisa's advice, don't think too much, is really saying trust the language you've already absorbed. Let it come out, even if it's messy.
There's something almost zen about that. Like the trying is what prevents the doing.
That's a perfect way to put it. And it connects to something deeper about learning in general. We have this cultural belief that more effort, more conscious control, more careful monitoring leads to better results. But in language acquisition, that's often backwards. Sometimes the path to fluency is through surrender, not control. But how do you teach someone to surrender? How do you tell someone who's been afraid their whole life to just stop being afraid? You don't. You can't command someone out of fear. But what you can do is create conditions where fear becomes unnecessary. You can build environments where mistakes are genuinely without consequence, where the social risk is removed, where the person experiences again and again that speaking imperfectly doesn't lead to rejection or humiliation.
So it's about repeated safe experiences.
Yes. And this is where Lisa's approach is so valuable. She's not just telling Lisa that mistakes are okay, she's demonstrating it. She's responding to his imperfect English with patience, with understanding, with encouragement. She's showing him, through her behavior, that the catastrophe he imagined won't happen. That's how you lower the affective filter. Not through logic, but through experience.
I'm thinking about all the Leos out there, all the people who have the language in their heads but can't get it out because of this filter. What a tragedy that is, to have the ability but not the permission, even if that permission is just permission from yourself.
It is a tragedy, and it's so common. But here's what gives me hope. The filter isn't permanent. It's not a fixed trait. It's a state that can change. Leo can learn to speak, not by becoming a different person, not by eliminating his shyness entirely, but by gradually, through practice and safe experiences, teaching his brain that speaking English isn't actually dangerous.
There's something moving about that. The idea that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it.
And in language learning, that courage looks like opening your mouth when every instinct tells you to stay quiet. It looks like saying the imperfect sentence instead of the perfect silence. That's the real bravery.
Which brings us to something I've been wondering about. If the fear is biological, if it's this deep evolutionary response, then maybe the solution isn't just psychological. Maybe there's something about the physical act of speaking, the mechanics of it, that can help bypass the fear. Because you can't think your way out of a biological response, but maybe you can move your way out of it. You know what I've been thinking about? We spend so much time worrying about getting every grammar rule perfect, every pronunciation exactly right. But is that actually what matters?
That's the question that changed my entire approach to teaching. I used to be that teacher, red pen in hand, marking every tiny mistake. And then I started noticing something strange. My students who spoke with confidence, even with mistakes, were actually communicating better than the ones who froze up trying to be perfect.
So what shifted for you?
There's this research by Monroe and Derwing from 2014 that really opened my eyes. They found that having a non-native accent doesn't necessarily reduce how well a listener understands you. Think about that for a second. Your accent, the thing so many learners obsess over, isn't actually the barrier they think it is.
Wait, so all those hours people spend trying to sound exactly like a native speaker?
Often wasted energy, or at least misplaced energy. What Monroe and Darwin argued is that we should be aiming for functional speech, not native-like speech. And that distinction, it's everything.
Break that down for me. What's the actual difference?
Can people understand what you're trying to say? Can you accomplish your goals in the language? Native-like speech means, do you sound indistinguishable from someone who grew up speaking this language? One of these is achievable and useful. The other is, well, it's often an impossible standard that just creates anxiety.
I'm thinking about all the international business meetings I've been in. Some of the most effective communicators had strong accents, but they were clear. They got their point across.
Yes, and there's actually a study that found what they call a breakpoint for intelligibility. It's at 64% transcription accuracy. Above that threshold, speakers are generally perceived as comprehensible, regardless of their accent. Below it, comprehension drops off. But here's the thing, that 64% isn't about sounding native. It's about being clear enough.
So there's an actual measurable point where communication works?
Right. And what gets you above that line isn't perfect grammar or a perfect accent. It's what linguists now call the lingua franca core, the essential features that actually make speech understandable. Things like clear consonant sounds, appropriate word stress, maintaining the rhythm of thought groups.
This feels like it should be liberating for learners, but I imagine it's also confusing because we've all been taught that grammar matters, that rules matter.
And they do. But here's the reframe. Grammar matters for clarity, not for perfection. If I say, yesterday I go to the store, instead of yesterday I went to the store, does that stop you from understanding me?
No, I know exactly what you mean.
That's the point. The goal isn't to never make mistakes. The goal is for people to understand you. And honestly, native speakers make mistakes all the time. We use sentence fragments, we start sentences and change direction halfway through, we use slang that technically breaks all the rules.
So why do we hold learners to a higher standard than we hold ourselves?
That's the trap, the perfection trap. And it's not just unfair, it's counterproductive. Because when you're so worried about making a mistake that you don't speak at all, you're not learning, you're not communicating, you're just stuck.
I want to push back on something though. Doesn't this risk creating a situation where people don't improve? If we say mistakes don't matter, won't people just stay at a basic level?
That's a fair concern, but it's based on a misunderstanding of what I'm saying. I'm not saying mistakes don't matter at all. I'm saying they don't matter more than communication. Think of it like this. If you're so focused on the perfect brushstroke that you never finish the painting, what's the point?
So it's about priorities.
Yes, and about understanding what actually creates barriers to communication versus what we've been told creates barriers. Your accent? Usually not a barrier. Your grammar mistakes? Usually not a barrier. You know what is a barrier? Not speaking at all because you're afraid of those things.
There's something almost philosophical about this. It's about having the courage to be imperfect.
And to be misunderstood sometimes. Because here's the thing, even native speakers get misunderstood. Communication is messy, it's negotiated. It's a back and forth where both people are working to understand each other. When we pretend it should be perfect, we're denying the reality of how language actually works.
So what does this mean practically? If someone's listening to this and they've been stuck in that perfection trap, what changes?
First, you stop waiting until you're ready to speak. You speak now, with whatever level you have. Second, you focus on being understood, not on being perfect. If someone doesn't understand you, you find another way to say it. That's not failure, that's communication. Third, you start noticing what actually matters. Is it that you used the wrong tense? Or is it that you mumbled and no one could hear you?
It's like the difference between playing scales perfectly in your room versus actually playing music with other people, mistakes and all.
Perfect analogy. And you know what? The person playing music with others, even imperfectly, is going to improve faster than the person alone with their scales, because they're getting real feedback. They're learning what works.
This makes me think about English as a global language. Most English conversations in the world aren't between native speakers anymore.
That's huge. English has become a lingua franca, a common language between people who don't share a native language. And in those conversations, the standard isn't British or American English. The standard is, can we understand each other? I've seen business meetings where someone from Japan, someone from Brazil, and someone from Germany are all speaking English, and none of them sound native, but they communicate perfectly.
So the model of correct English is actually outdated?
It's not that there's no such thing as correct English. It's that correctness serves communication, not the other way around. If your incorrect English is perfectly understandable, then functionally it's working. And if your correct English is so formal and stilted that no one wants to talk to you, then what have you really achieved?
This feels like it should be obvious, but it's not how most people learn.
Because we've inherited this idea that language learning is about mastering rules. But language isn't really about rules. It's about connection. It's about being understood and understanding others. The rules are just tools to help with that, not the goal itself.
What about the people who do want to sound native, though? Is that a legitimate goal?
Sure, if that's what you want and you understand it's a long-term project. But I'd ask, why? Is it because you genuinely love the sound of the language and want to master it at that level? Or is it because you think people won't take you seriously otherwise? Because if it's the latter, the research doesn't support that fear.
So it comes back to understanding what you're actually trying to achieve.
Always. And for most people, what they're trying to achieve is, I want to work in English, or travel, or make friends, or consume media. None of those require a perfect accent. They require functional communication. And that's so much more achievable than people think.
There's something really freeing about this perspective. It's like you're giving people permission to just communicate.
That's it. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to make mistakes. Permission to sound like yourself, not like some idealized native speaker. Because here's what I've learned after years of teaching. The students who give themselves that permission, they're the ones who actually become fluent. Not because they're more talented, but because they're not afraid to use the language they have.
Which brings us to something interesting. If perfection isn't the goal, what does practice actually look like? Because I imagine it's different from the traditional approach.
So Emma, I want to dig into something specific from Lisa's approach, this technique called shadowing. I've heard the term before, but I'm curious what's actually happening when someone does it.
Shadowing is deceptively simple on the surface. You listen to a speaker, could be a podcast, a video, whatever, and you repeat what they're saying immediately, like an echo. But here's the key. You're not just parroting words. You're trying to match their pronunciation, their intonation, their rhythm, the whole sonic package.
Like you're becoming their vocal shadow.
Yes, and what's interesting is where this technique came from. It was actually formalized in Japan back in 1992 by a researcher named Tamai. They were using it to train simultaneous interpreters. You know, those people who have to translate speeches in real time at the UN or international conferences.
Wait, so this wasn't originally a language learning tool, it was for professionals who already knew the language?
Right. They needed to build what researchers call motor auditory fluency. Think about what a simultaneous interpreter does. They're hearing one language and speaking another at almost the same moment. Their brain has to process sound and produce speech simultaneously. Shadowing trains that exact skill.
That's wild. So when Lisa tells learners to shadow, she's essentially borrowing a technique from the most demanding language task imaginable.
And here's where it gets really interesting from a neuroscience perspective. There's this concept called the phonological loop. It's part of your working memory. Think of it as a temporary storage system in your brain that holds sounds and words while you're processing them.
Like a buffer?
Perfect analogy. When you hear someone speak, your brain captures those sounds in this loop, holds them for a few seconds, and processes them. But here's the thing. Most language learners only use half of the system. They listen, the sounds go into the loop, and then nothing. The loop just fades.
Because they're not speaking.
Right, but when you shadow, you're forcing that loop to complete. You hear the sound, it enters the loop, and then you immediately reproduce it. Your brain starts to recognize patterns faster because it's not just passively receiving, it's actively reconstructing.
So it's like the difference between watching someone play piano versus actually putting your fingers on the keys.
That's a great way to put it, and there's actual neuroscience backing this up. Studies show that when you read aloud, which is essentially what shadowing is, you activate your auditory cortex and your sensoromotor cortex way more intensely than when you read silently. You're lighting up multiple brain regions at once.
What does that do for you practically?
It enhances semantic processing, meaning you understand the meaning better, and it boosts attention. Your brain is more engaged because it's doing something, not just receiving. And over time, this creates what I call motor memory for the language.
Motor memory, like muscle memory?
Yes, your mouth, your tongue, your vocal cords, they start to learn the physical patterns of English. Because here's something people don't realize. Speaking a language isn't just mental, it's physical. Your mouth has to move in specific ways to produce certain sounds. English speakers use their mouths differently than, say, Vietnamese speakers or Arabic speakers.
So when Lisa says in the PDF that speaking out loud trains the mouth and brain, she's being literal.
Completely literal.
Your brain is learning the cognitive patterns, but your mouth is learning the physical choreography. And shadowing forces both to work together in real time. That's why it helps you speak faster and more naturally. You're not translating in your head anymore. You're building direct pathways from sound to speech.
I'm thinking about what this means for someone who's been studying English for years but still feels slow when they speak. They might know all the grammar, all the vocabulary, but their mouth hasn't practiced the movements.
That's the gap shadowing fills. It's the difference between knowing how to ride a bike in theory and actually balancing on two wheels. You can read every book about cycling, but until your body learns the physical skill, you're going to wobble.
So when someone shadows, what should they actually be paying attention to? Because I imagine there's a temptation to just focus on getting the words right.
That's the trap. Words are actually the least important part at first. You want to match the rhythm. English has this stress-timed rhythm that's very different from syllable-timed languages. You want to match the intonation, where the voice goes up and down. And you want to match the pronunciation, but not in a perfectionist way. You're training your ear and your mouth to work as a unit.
It sounds almost meditative in a way. You're completely present with the sound.
It is, and that presence is what makes it so effective. You can't shadow while thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. You're locked into the moment, which is the state your brain needs to be in to form new neural pathways.
I'm curious about something though. When you're shadowing, are you understanding what you're saying or is it more automatic?
That's a great question, and it evolves. At first, you might be so focused on the sounds that meaning takes a backseat. But over time, something remarkable happens. The meaning and the sound start to fuse. You begin to understand not just with your analytical brain, but with your whole sensory system. The sound itself starts to carry meaning.
Like how native speakers don't translate in their heads.
Yes, they hear dog and they don't think dog means perro or dog means shen. They just know. Shadowing helps you build that direct connection. It's training your brain to process English, not as a code to be decrypted.
I'm thinking about why so many traditional methods don't work. They're all about the code, grammar rules, vocabulary lists, but they're not training the actual mechanism of fluency.
You've hit on something crucial there, and it connects to what we were talking about earlier with Lisa's philosophy. She's not interested in making you good at English class. She's interested in making you good at English, and that requires training your brain and body to work together in real time, which is what shadowing does.
It's almost like the technique itself embodies her whole approach. It's active, it's immediate, it's focused on the doing rather than the knowing.
And it requires courage, which brings us back to that central theme. Because when you shadow, especially at first, you sound ridiculous. You're stumbling, you're behind the speaker, you're mispronouncing things. But that's the point. You're training, not performing. And that distinction between training and performing might be the most important thing a learner can understand.
You know what strikes me about this whole conversation? We've been talking about language learning, but there's something bigger here, isn't there? This pattern of waiting until you're ready. It shows up everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. I see it constantly. People say, I'll start going to the gym once I'm in better shape. And I'm like, that's literally the point of the gym. You go there to get in shape, not because you already are.
Right. It's this weird paradox. You don't wait to be strong to start lifting weights. You lift weights to become strong. But somehow, with language learning, people think they need to be fluent before they can practice speaking.
It's the same with cooking. Nobody expects themselves to make a perfect souffle on their first try. You burn things, you oversalt things. You learn what simmer actually means by watching the pot bubble too hard and making a mess. That's not failure. That's the process.
I love that example because it's so visceral. You can't learn to cook by reading recipes. You have to actually stand there, smell when something's burning, feel when the dough is too sticky. The knowledge lives in your hands, not just your head.
And here's what's remarkable. Your brain is literally physically changing when you do this. When you're learning a new skill, whether it's a language or cooking or anything else, you are increasing gray matter density in the areas related to cognitive control. You're strengthening neural connections in your memory and attention centers. Your brain is rewiring itself through the act of doing.
Wait, so it's not metaphorical? When we say practice makes perfect, there's actual structural change happening in the brain?
Completely literal. Neuroplasticity. Your brain is constantly reshaping itself based on what you do. Every time you stumble through a conversation in a new language, every time you try a new recipe, you're building new pathways. The discomfort you feel, that's the sensation of your brain working hard to create those connections.
That reframes everything. So when something feels hard and uncomfortable, that's not a sign you're doing it wrong. That's a sign you're doing it right.
You're in the zone where growth happens.
Yes, and you know what? I wish someone had told me this when I was starting out in my career. My first real job, I was terrified. I remember sitting at my desk on day one, looking at this project they'd assigned me and thinking, I have no idea what I'm doing. They're going to figure out I don't belong here.
Imposter syndrome?
Massive imposter syndrome. But here's the thing. Nobody expects you to know everything on your first day, or your first month, or even your first year. You learn by doing the work, making small mistakes, asking questions that feel stupid, getting feedback. That's literally how every single person in that office learned their job. What kind of mistakes are we talking about? Oh, everything. I once sent an email to the entire company instead of just my team. I used the wrong terminology in a presentation and had to be corrected in front of clients. I missed deadlines because I didn't understand how long things actually took. Each one felt mortifying at the time. But you know what? Those mistakes taught me more than any training manual ever could. Because you felt them. They had consequences, even if they were small ones. Right. And my boss at the time, she said something that stuck with me. She said, Emma, if you're not making mistakes, you're not learning. I'd be more worried if everything was going perfectly. That gave me permission to be a beginner, to be imperfect, to focus on progress instead of perfection.
Progress. That's such a simple word, but it's powerful. What does progress actually mean in this context?
Moving forward, or getting better little by little. Not giant leaps, not overnight transformation, just incremental improvement. Today, you understand one more thing than you did yesterday. This week, you can do something that felt impossible last week. That's progress.
And progress comes from action, not perfection. Every try helps you improve, even if it feels hard at first, even if you mess up, especially if you mess up, maybe.
Especially if you mess up. Because that's when you're pushing against your current limits. That's when your brain is working hardest to build those new connections. The discomfort is the point.
So whether you're learning a language, starting a new job, going to the gym, learning to cook, learning to drive, the principle is the same.
You don't wait until you're good at it to start. You start, and through the act of starting, through the mistakes and the discomfort and the small victories, you become good at it.
That's it. That's the universal law. And yet, somehow, we keep forgetting it. We keep waiting for permission or confidence or the perfect moment. But the perfect moment is now. The permission comes from yourself. And the confidence? That's built through action, not before it. I'm thinking about all the things I've put off because I didn't feel ready. And I'm realizing I was waiting for a feeling that only comes from doing the thing I was avoiding.
Welcome to being human. We all do it. The question is, what are you going to do about it?
Fair question. And I think that brings us to something important. Because knowing this principle intellectually is one thing, but actually applying it, that's where it gets interesting. There's this gap between understanding and doing, and I want to explore what lives in that gap. You know, Emma, as we've been talking through all of this, the fear, the perfectionism, the shadowing techniques, I keep coming back to something. We've given people a lot of understanding today, but understanding why you're stuck and actually unsticking yourself, those are two very different things, aren't they?
That's the gap we've been circling around this whole conversation. And honestly, that gap never fully closes. Even now, when I'm about to try something new, a different teaching approach, a talk in front of colleagues, I still feel that same resistance. The difference is I've learned to recognize it as the feeling that comes right before growth, not a stop sign.
So if someone's listening to this right now, maybe they're Leo, maybe they understand English but haven't spoken in months or years, what's the actual first move? Not the theory, the thing they do tomorrow morning.
Find one person who won't judge you. Not a teacher, not a test, just one human being who'll let you stumble through a conversation. A language exchange partner online, a friend, even talking to yourself while shadowing a podcast. The goal isn't to speak well. It's to prove to your nervous system that speaking has no real consequences. You do that once, then twice, then 10 times, and that filter we talked about, it starts to crack.
And I think that principle, proving to yourself through action, not convincing yourself through thought, that applies way beyond language learning. I'm thinking about all the times I've waited to feel ready before starting something. Ready to launch a project, ready to have a difficult conversation, ready to try a new skill. And that readiness, it never actually arrives on its own, does it?
Never. Readiness is something you build in retrospect. You look back after doing the thing and realize, oh, I was more capable than I thought. But you can't see that capability from the starting line. You can only see it from the finish line looking backward.
So maybe the real question isn't how do I get ready, but what's the smallest version of this scary thing I can do right now? For Leo, maybe that's not a full conversation. Maybe it's just repeating one sentence out loud. For someone else, maybe it's sending that email they've been drafting for weeks. Just making the fear slightly smaller by proving it wrong in the tiniest possible way.
Yes, and here's what I want people to hear. If you're feeling that discomfort right now, that resistance to taking action, that's not a sign something's wrong with you. That's your brain doing what it evolved to do. The question is whether you're going to let that ancient protective mechanism make decisions about your modern life. Because the truth is, speaking imperfect English won't get you kicked out of the tribe. Making mistakes won't threaten your survival. But staying silent, that might actually cost you the connections, opportunities, and growth you're looking for.
I love that reframe. The risk isn't in speaking, it's in not speaking. And maybe that's where we leave this. Wherever you are in your learning journey, whatever language or skill or challenge you're facing, the discomfort you feel isn't the problem. It's the price of admission. It's what growth feels like from the inside. So the only real question left is, what are